Greetings! So we will be doing a MANOVA today in R. So MANOVA stands for Multivariate Analysis of Variance, and it's a test that essentially looks at more than one outcome variable. So it takes an extra step from MANOVA and ANCOVA and, well, yeah, that's pretty much it. But anyways, so the beauty of MANOVA is that it can do things that an ANOVA can't do. So for example, it takes into account the relationship between different variables. It can provide the power to detect the relationships between different, or what to detect whether groups differ along the combination of dimensions. Um, and instead of running multiple ANOVAs and for testing or just looking at uh, multiple outcome variables, you can just run an ANOVA, not an ANOVA, a MANOVA, and not really risk, or you can avoid inflating the type 1 error rate. So that's beautiful right there. However, there are some considerations to think about when you're trying to, or you're going to conduct a MANOVA. So it's important to have a theory behind your variables. You don't want to just throw in variables all willy-nilly, given that you may not find anything, or you're running the risk of inflating the error rate anyways as well. So with MANOVA, it's important to have theoretical underpinnings when you're considering your variables. Another thing to take into account is the power of MANOVA. So MANOVA essentially depends upon, being that it looks at different outcome variables, it takes into account their relationships with one another, not just with the predictor variable. So the power is dependent upon those intercorrelations, and then it's also dependent upon the group differences. So if your groups, if each group that you have hold different numbers of participants, then that's gonna throw off MANOVA essentially. So as far as what MANOVA does, it's much like an ANOVA in that it compares the systematic variance to the unsystematic variance. So our model to our error, essentially. The difference is that MANOVA works with matrices. And if you remember matrices in uh, grade school, then good for you. If you don't, I highly encourage you to look it up, because if you're going to do a MANOVA by hand, and I know I haven't done that here, obviously, you kind of want to understand matrices. But in essence, MANOVA compares matrices, or compares the matrix that represents systematic variance to a matrix representing unsystematic variance of all variables. So just to reiterate, it does the same thing. Conceptually, it does the same thing as ANOVA. As far as execution, it does something completely different. It's comparing matrices. So for assumptions, ANOVA has similar assumptions to that of ANOVA. So independence, your correlation. Blah, blah, blah. There shouldn't be any correlations. Excuse me. No. The scores on the dependent variables should not be dependent upon another dependent variable or outcome variable. So yeah, there shouldn't be any correlations between your well, let me not use that word correlation, because that's going to be confusing. So scratch out all the correlation of what I just said, and I'll repeat myself even better. So the scores on one outcome variable should not be dependent upon another. There we go. Random sampling is another assumption for ANOVA. MANOVA does have some additional assumptions, so multivariate normalities and homogeneity of covariance matrices. So in a very watered down, and when I mean watered down, I mean like this thing is in like Crystal Lake with Jason Voorhees. In essence, it is normality. It's assumption of normality taken to an additional step, in that your variables or your data lies on a multivariate normal distribution. So in essence, it's normality taken to a higher dimension. It's more than just one on a univariate dimension. It's going towards multivariate dimensions. So that's like the watered Jason Voorhees. What other movie? Jaws. Jaws, water drowning dilute of what multivariate normality is. Homogeneity of covariance matrices, it takes, essentially it's the homogeneity of variance but with a step taken forward. So while it does assume that the variances between your dependent groups are the same, not dependent groups. Let me explain that again. So with homogeneity of covariance matrices, there is the assumption that the variances for each outcome variable are the same across all groups, and the relationships between the outcome variables are roughly equal. So the covariance between those outcome variables, or the covariance of outcome variables, so the relationship between them. So in essence, multivariate, no, not a multivariate, homogeneity of covariance matrices just takes an additional step from homogeneity of variances. That's pretty much it. Let me make sure I captured everything I'm supposed to tell you in this first one. Yep. Okay, so now moving on to the assignment. So for this assignment, I'm looking to see if Black women's facial expressions have an effect on people's perceptions of approachability, trustworthiness, and credibility. So participants rated the faces of the experimenter, so me, and they also rated my approachability, trustworthiness, and credibility. And these are rated on a scale of from 1 to 10. So the facial expressions include blank, so just not showing any emotion at all. It's kind of like you're not smiling, not frowning. Your mouth just makes like that straight line. It's kind of like the same look undergraduates have when they're walking to class every day. But then again, that could be like the face of death of an undergraduate student. Anyways, besides the point, just you're not showing any facial expression. You're just no emotions. Numb would be a good word. Another facial expression is happy, and then the other one is mad. So just with my predictor variables, I have one predictor variable, and it is facial expressions, and it has 3 levels: blank, happy, and mad. I have 3 outcome variables: approachability, trustworthiness, and credibility. And the research question I propose is, does Black women's facial expressions have an effect on approachability, trustworthiness, and credibility? So for this test, I would reason this particular assignment or this research topic would align with this particular test, so the MANOVA. being that I'm looking at more than one outcome variable. So in the next video, I will be actually conducting the test and running all the analyses in R. So if you want to stick around for that, just watch the next video.